This is not a talk if you are a sort of end user or site administrator and you want the sort of Joel Burton type talk that says these are the really good tips for making Plone like as it is now. This is about what we can do with Plone in the future, what we as the developer community, as the integrated community can do to make Plone easier for integrators to use, more approachable, what technologies we have that are good, that work, what technologies we have that are bad that we want to get rid of, and mapping out a process by which we can actually make those decisions and improve Plone's kind of architecture and approachability for developers and integrators. So if you kind of expect to come out of this knowing what buttons to click to make Plone much easier to use for your end users today, you won't know, I'm afraid. And I think, yeah, it's not only for core developers. Core developers will get something out of it. Integrators, I really hope to get some feedback and talk about what's difficult and what technologies you don't like. So I think if you're that kind of audience, then please stick around. But if you consider this an end user kind of thing, then, well, you might find it interesting, but you probably won't find it terribly useful. Yeah, I mean, we can probably start. In the open source community, we share the love in everything. So Alex has kindly given me his virus that he had, so I'm now sick. So yeah, it's a sort of GPL license illness. So apologies if I start coughing or disappear, or if I drink frequently. Can everybody hear me? In the back. Can everybody see the slides? There doesn't seem to be a lot of room. There's a couple of seats at the front. If you're sitting near the back, you might want to move further up, but you might not. Okay, the rest are trickling in. Okay, so just by way of context, I mean, I think we see in the community that we kind of quite quickly arrive at shared understandings of certain things. So, you know, I think there was a time when we felt that, you know, it's very important that we upgrade our stack and move to a more modern platform, and we were sort of very stuck in Zope 2 CMF land. That was kind of the mantra for a while. I think there was a time, sort of at the previous conference, the mantra was very much, we've got to stabilize things, and we've got to stop having sort of cowboy releases that go and do, you know, break everything and break every add-on product. I think those two problems we've largely solved. I think Wiggy is doing a great job of making Plone 3 very, very boring, which is exactly what it should be. I think the sort of the analogy of the Ubuntu long-term support was used. Alex said it. I came up with it, just for the record. But you know, I think that's very much, in terms of feature set, Plone has gotten to a point now where we don't have any big, embarrassing missing features. Rich media probably is one of them. Blob support, but blob support is easy to install, and rich media with blob support is not that hard to do, and there's add-on products that can do it. They can be slightly better, but I mean, can anybody think of any sort of, oh my god, it's so embarrassing, we don't have this kind of things that are in Plone at the moment? Yeah.
Factoring stuff out, like a common price for a package you're selling on your site, being able to put that once and only once on your site.
Right, so yeah, so snippet support, I think we call that. So the thing is, like, if I have a price for something, I want to put it in everywhere, but I want to maintain it in one place. Yeah, that's definitely something we should have. Yeah.
Import, export.
Yeah, import export sucks, absolutely, and with it migrations suck. Again, slightly different problem space, but yeah, we should get better at that. But in terms of like end user features, I mean, I think you know, before Plone 3, we're like, oh my god, we don't have versioning, and CMS without versioning is pretty shitty, to be honest. We just didn't admit it back then, and now we can say it. Yeah, Francesco. Yeah, user management is not amazing, but it's not bad either. I mean, I think it works, and we got LDAP integration, and that's what people really want. So, yeah, I mean, I think that my point is just that was kind of the mantra then. And the big mantra these days is, oh my god, Plone is too hard to learn. I take a lot of responsibility for that. I think, you know, I've been beating some drums to improve the stack and use better frameworks, and I think in one way that stuff is it's really allowed us to be very innovative and do stuff like build features that we just didn't even want to get started on before because the stack felt painful, and I think it's kind of made us as developers a lot more productive. I mean, you look at someone like Kapil, for example, who kind of, when you give him Zope 3, he built interesting stuff, and before he had Zope 3, you know, it was It was different. And then you can take those things and put them in, so we have iterate or whatever, and it's like, that was actually not very much code, but it's a really, really cool feature. And I think content mirror is kind of similar, like these technologies have enabled us to do this, but unfortunately they've also raised the learning curve. And the problem we see time and again is there's like an old way and a new way, and we're kind of stuck in between them. So like Alex says, skinning is too hard. I mean, it's too difficult right now to skin a plone site, really. I think, Joel said it is a 2-day course is not necessarily enough to make you a great plone skinner, which is very unfortunate. Okay, so this talk is kind of, okay, what can we do about this? And it's called Simplifying Plone with a Chainsaw, because we need to cut stuff out, I think. So to begin with, I want to thank Leonard. Is Leonard at the conference? I haven't seen him. That's a shame. He's a hard man to miss if he had been here, so I didn't think he was. But Leonard has this great talk called What Zope Did Wrong. Has anyone seen that talk? Who's seen the What Zope Did Wrong talk? Okay, so basically Leonard kept saying, yeah, I did this talk, and the first time was an hour, the second time was half an hour, the third time I did it was 10 minutes, so I'm going to do it in 1 minute. Basically, it goes like this. Zope to a learning curve is like this. Starts off really easy, through the web, everything's happy, and then you hit a cliff, and he goes like, oh my god, I need to go to the file system, and then it's like, drop everything you've done and relearn. So that's bad. So 3 learning curve is like this. So you there's a reasonably high initial cost of understanding what is an adapter and a utility and sort of certain core concepts. But once you got them, Zope 3 is really easy. Like once you kind of know the basic stuff, you can do a lot with it because everything kind of uses the same 3 or 4 core concepts just in different guises. Unfortunately, when you combine Zope 2 and Zope 3 with 5, you get this, which means it's really hard to get started, and then you can kind of chuckling along for a while, and then it gets even harder to keep going. So we're sorry. But basically what we want is this, right? We want a sort of happy, lumpy kind of, you start off somewhere, you kind of like Alex says, your first day success. Like, okay, I got Plone installed and I got this cool CMS. And if you went to Alex's talk, you'll see like some of the features we want to build for end users that will actually make Plone, going from currently being a pretty sort of run-of-the-mill CMS, but quite stable and featureful, to being sort of pretty innovative and exciting in terms of page layout and composition and that sort of stuff. And then you sort of got your sort of end of first week success, like I got this, and I can capture my data model for my organization. And then like you got your sort of end of first month success, which is, when I made it scale really well, or I branded it to look exactly like we want, or like kind of, you want those sort of stepwise things. Most importantly, when you move from one of these to another, you don't want to have to throw away everything you learned in the first place. So it needs, like, it's not very hard to make it sort of really simple to do simple customizations through the web, for example. But it's very hard to make it possible to do simple customizations through the web, and then you can continue to build on those things you did through the web when you decide that actually I need version control and file system and all that kind of stuff. Does that mean through the web is the wrong model? If you ask Malta, maybe yes. If you ask me, maybe it's something in between. But I think we just need to be very cognizant of the audience that we are actually selling this stuff to, and what do they want, what do they know, what are they capable of learning, how much learning are they willing to sustain, because people these days have got a lot of choices and frameworks and platforms, and they expect things to be easy, they expect things to be laid out for them. I think sort of our integrators these days are probably a little bit lazier than they were before, because they've been spoiled by lots of other things that are easy to learn. So essentially I'm a consultant. I do flowcharts for a living and spreadsheets. So I got a flowchart. So the first thing I think we need to do is just ask. And I really like to do that here. I'm going to go through a few things, and then we kind of open up for a random discussion and questions, and I'll try to capture some stuff. But we need to structure a discussion with the community that says, all right, what do you hate? And I think as developers, we shy away from those discussions because it's pretty depressing, actually, to get bitched at by people. They go like, oh, I hate this, and this is so difficult. And you kind of go like, well, just stop giving up. Just try a little bit harder, and you kind of get frustrated, and people are just throwing the towel after the first attempt. But we need to ask those questions, and we need to structure the answers. We need to filter out the venting and the kind of, I'm angry with Plone because I spent the day doing it, or I'm angry with Plone because the guy who did it before me didn't know what he was doing and left me with a pile of, a mess, which is not something we can do anything about. From the legitimate, actually, I've seen how this is done in framework XYZ, and why it isn't Plone like that. Or, actually, this thing took me this long to understand because I didn't have this necessary piece of information. So we kind of got to ask, we've got to categorize all those answers. I've sort of volunteered John Stahl to do all this, by the way, just in case he's here. And then we got to evaluate. So we got to evaluate, what do we have already? Like, what are our technologies? And I think it's easy as developers to become perfectionists, and we go like, well, like plone is an old product now. It's mature. It's got legacy. Legacy is not sexy, right? And it's got character, right? Exactly. It's got wrinkles. And Zope is an even older technology, and Zope 3 is a new technology that's getting old. And like I think we could certainly try and perfect things. And when we start thinking, could we perfect this? The ultimate answer is yes, if we started from scratch. The problem is if we did that, we just introduce different problems. No one designs anything perfect the first time around. But it's about knowing what is good enough, because a lot of stuff we have is actually quite good. And I'll go into some of the positives later. And plone works for people. We managed to get 320 people to come to Washington D.C. I'm sure you don't all live here, and many of you probably would have had better things to do if you weren't using plone. And I think that's important. We got to say that we've got some good stuff. And then we've got to evaluate what is bad, and often it's about kind of saying, okay, maybe we've got two different ways of doing something, but we've got to identify the best approach. What is best practice? And you've got to spell that out. I mean, I think Dylan has been working on this, the Kaizen plone stuff, and other people frustrated about documentation that says there's two ways of doing it, and this documentation is this up to date, and you don't know. It could be, but if you don't know, it's as bad as if it isn't almost. So we need to sort of identify and be quite clear about what's best practice. And the best way to do that actually is to let the code do the talking. So we've got to make sure that plone itself and what you ship with uses all the best practice out of the box. And that, if you copy plone, you're in a good place. That should be the mantra. And generally is, but isn't always. And then we got to chop. So the stuff that isn't best practice anymore, whether we rip it out completely, we leave it as a install the plone legacy support kind of package if you need legacy because you got products that depend on it, or whether we leave it there but with deprecation warning, or it depends on what it is, right? But we've got to have the balls to say this is actually no longer the way you want to do things, rather than saying, well, you could do this and it still works, it's quite good, but there's this other way and it's quite cool, and whatever, you may want to look at this, like that stuff doesn't help anybody, because unless you're already an expert, that doesn't give you anything. So we've got to be quite strong. And I think the other thing is actually sometimes, and we're really bad at this, and I'm particularly bad at this, we've got to be able to say, actually, what we have now is good enough, and we don't have to perfect it. We don't have to move to everything new. And I know that this is more like a sort of do what I say rather than what I do, because I'm personally, as a developer, motivated by being innovative. But sometimes you've got to be able to say, actually, yes, this will give us a 10% benefit, but it will be a sort of an enormous cost in terms of sort of relearning and whatever. You've got to do some sort of cost-benefit analysis on the features we put in, and sometimes it's just let's just wait a little bit longer. This isn't critical, and so on. Okay, so if you think about what are our sort of guiding lights, what stuff is happening out there in the communities that we are connected to, and the technologies that we are connected to that we can do, and I think there's more than this, and we'll open some suggestions, but I think if you look at the Zope community, with which we overlap quite a lot, I think the majority of the innovation is happening in Grok. Grok is effectively what happened when a few people said Zope 3 is quite difficult to approach because it is just so general and you can sort of do everything you want with it. But actually, what we want to do is be opinionated and tell people this is the way you should do it. We want to kind of lead them down a path that makes it very obvious what they should do, and we want to think about patterns, and we want to think about sort of developer friendliness. And that's what Martijn and Philip and others have done to come up with, sort of the glossy finish on top of Zope 3 perhaps, which is Grok. And I think a lot of sort of interesting patterns are emerging from that we should evaluate and look at. Repose is another one which is at the kind of complete opposite end of the stack. So Repose is the kind of trying to get Zope and plone to play in a WSGI world to be kind of much more like of a standard Python framework, so you can kind of integrate bits with other bits. I think some great success stories with Repose. I don't know, is Chris and Trace, are you here, you guys? Maybe not, but if you see Chris and Trace, you should buy them a beer because they're doing some amazing stuff with this, and kind of the fact that the Zope transaction manager was factored out into middleware, and TurboGears now uses that as a standard transaction manager. It's actually pretty awesome. And there's a few things we can do to kind of just be a little bit more integratable. Like there's not even that hard for us to say we could be a little bit easier to integrate with, and I'll come to that in a minute. And the framework I quite like is Pylons, and it's like I like it because it's like the anti-Zope. There's so little framework in Pylons that you don't even realize it's there. It really just, you generate a skeleton and you say, well, here's where you probably want to put your code, and this stuff's kind of available because you're going to need a request, and if you put this file here, it becomes a bit of the URL, but you can kind of just, it's like, this is just set up with this Python code, and like, you couldn't build plone in Pylons, right? I mean, that would be very hard, but But if you want like a really quick and dirty, simple application, there's the cost of learning it is like an hour or two maybe, and it's got a sort of feel where it's like it's a little bit dirty. It's not architecturally perfect in the way that kind of it depends on conventions and sort of code generation, at least skeleton generation, not code generation after the first skeleton, but but actually it's easy because you've got something tangible and you can play with it. And again, I think TurboGears is a great example of a project that's kind of gone and integrated everything with everything. I suspect that might make it a bit hard to pick up because there's lots of technologies involved, but they're very like best of breed for everything, and we can certainly be better at kind of not inventing stuff ourselves sometimes. So, I mean, is there any other sort of, I'm looking at Malta because I didn't put Voodoo on here, but is there any other sort of projects you think are exemplary in being approachable to people? Yeah?
I think maybe Repose BFG should have
Yeah.
special mention because it's
Yeah, so Repose BFG, which stands for, I think, Big Fine Gun. I'm not sure what that, Big Friendly Giant, Big Fucking, I don't know, is essentially Chris rewriting Zope, I think, somehow. It's like sort of Zope light. I don't know what you call it. Yeah, it's very interesting. It kind of makes Zope-ish concept available through a much simpler front end. It kind of serves the same type of purpose that Grok is trying to serve, in that it's trying to be integrated friendly, just with a slightly different focus. Yeah, absolutely. Any other? Yeah.
There's Track, which is probably the best Python web framework that isn't a web framework.
Yeah, Track. I mean, Track is one of those things that is like it's so dirty, it's good. It's kind of like I mean, Track is nasty in many ways, but it's also really cool because like you can sort of you can get stuff done with it. It's very imperfect, but it's kind of, that's why it's good, because you can sort of, I know that I can hack some report into this, or I can query the database, or I can do something with it. I've never seen a Track plugin that didn't suck. Maybe I just haven't looked hard enough, but absolutely. Sorry?
I'll show you mine.
Okay, excellent. I want to see yours. But yeah, Track is a good one, and again, kind of similar. It tries to be very simple. Any other sort of things we're happy with? Kapil? Web.py. I haven't used it. Why is that?
It's a full service stack in the sense that it has model-based development, gives a nice admin user interface, very approachable and easy to use and well documented.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I think that the key words there, easy to use, well documented, gives you everything you need. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, I mean, I think these are more like, let's keep these in the back of our heads, but I'll come back to why I think some of these other ones are important too. So if we think about Plone 4, this is a very much of a 4 example, but I'm saying if I walk up to Plone, I've installed it, and go, okay, what's my first thing I'm doing? All right, I'm going to install the package, and I think there we're doing all right. Then I'm going to create some content, and I'm going to sort of build my site or my system with, I've got these folders, this structure here, and I've got this kind of, maybe I set up some content rules, and I set up, you got to users build applications out of Plone in a way, because they're, the structure of their content and the settings they change affect the behavior of their site, their system. So that's maybe the first thing you do, and then you kind of go, all right, well, I really wish that this thing was blue instead of green, and I want to have my logo up there. So that's maybe the next thing they want to do, is to kind of do very, very simple customization. Well, not even customization, just essentially settings that affect visual rendering. Then the next thing they might want to do is branding, and if you went to Alex's talk, the different, branding and customization currently are the same thing. We do them with the same tool set. If you want to change the markup that comes out of Plone radically to I don't want to, I want to pull out some information that wasn't previously in this template. I have the first picture in the news item as a thumbnail, but I really need 2 thumbnails, and I know that I can, hack something in there to get, whatever. But those kind of things are customizations, whereas, I just want to put this inside a slightly different HTML structure and put some different CSS on it. That's branding, and I think branding is a much more important use case for beginners, because, the Plone gives you quite a lot of features out of the box already. And then you want to do sort of templating customization, so your branding only gets you so far, and you want to actually dig deeper and go, okay, I need to actually customize this template because I need to produce some very different HTML here, and I need to have some different type of stuff. Then maybe you want to do some content types. I want to build some really simple schema that represents my organization. I need to keep my staff directory right. Okay, my staff have all got the following fields I need to capture. Why can't I not just dump this into Plone? As part of my intranet. That makes a lot of sense. One I kind of missed here is probably security and workflow. I want to customize my security model in my site. And then you kind of go into sort of deeper things. You start getting much more into I need to be a programmer to understand this, and it's what I call behavior, which is I need something to behave very differently than it does in plone. So I need, I don't know, like I need something that would require me to implement a custom content rule, or I need like something that does a search across content in a very much more complicated way than what you can manage with a collection, or I need reporting on certain things. And then you kind of go into sort of integration, which I think often isn't integration these days. People sort of build stuff into plone because they want the plone UI and they want the same account management. So they want like, I log into my intranet. My intranet is plone, therefore I need to build my time tracking product in plone. And I think people have tried to build time tracking products in plone, but it doesn't. Plone isn't really built for that stuff. A time entry isn't content, and you probably want a relational database. You can query it, and then you look at relational database integration. It's like it becomes tricky because people build stuff in plone that it wasn't designed for. And I'll talk about that a little bit later as well. Okay, so what do we have that works well? I think our installation story is pretty good. I think content editing and sort of our content editing GUI, plone is still a very user-friendly CMS for certain values of user-friendly. Certainly if you want to be innovative there again and solve some of the problems we have now, but I think, you look at a lot of the competition and at least they suck more. I think collections are a wonderful feature. The UI for them is terrible, but I hadn't really appreciated until I did a project recently how useful they can be because they give end users the ability to do stuff. A couple of other things I missed here. DC Workflow is actually a pretty nice tool, and it's got a kind of, DC Workflow's got a pretty good balance of like, it's not the most perfect thing. If we were to design it from scratch now, we would sort of use different technologies, but like DC Workflow, it's great. It works really well. It's got all the features you need. It's very easy to understand. I think the ZODB is very good as a content store, not necessarily for everything, but the ZODB is certainly one of those things that I think we can be proud of in the Zope community. And I think the way that we manage settings, control panels, we're quite good at exposing things to users, both through the ZMI and through control panel. Content rules is another one. I think is certainly Joel says a lot of his students find them very useful, and it's about sort of putting stuff that you would need to do as a programmer in the hands of sort of advanced user, which a lot of people can become advanced users. Anyone else got any sort of things they think plone is particularly good at and are willing to admit it? This is depressing. Multilingual, yeah. Certainly, we're a lot better at internationalization and multilingual than many other systems. Yeah. Oh well. Okay, so you can think about sort of trying to think what people are doing. You can sort of come up with like sort of cliffs. That you get plone installed and you sort of say, okay, the first thing you ask is like, I've gone in there, I've changed all these settings, I've put up my content. It's like, wow, it's a really cool system. And like, okay, but how would I get my logo in the top left corner? And then you sort of say, okay, so you can go to the ZMI and you can go to the custom folder, and if you find this thing in this folder called plone images, and you click this button, it's there, but actually, then you upload a new image, but then actually, we really want you to do it on a file system, so what you might want to do is easy install and Zopescale, and then run this command, except if you're on Windows, you're going to have to put it in your bin directory, and you might need to put MingW32 in the diststudios config, and then you can run this thing, and then you got this place to put your logo, but you got to make sure you install it, and if you didn't follow the instructions correctly, it breaks. So, but it's great. And the thing is, like, with the reason for this, thank you. but the reason why this is so is because actually in the long run, if you are theming a site and customizing, this is what you want, and so we kind of trying to save you that SOAP 2 cliff, because we're saying, yeah, you could do it this sort of simple way, but there's no sort of transition from there to the sort of proper way, or the transition is dirty and requires you to understand a lot of stuff. So like, we kind of say, well, you probably want to do this because it's going to cost you later. The problem is, that's fine if you are a user that is either very technical or very committed to plone and willing to learn, because you're going to want to use the system. But if you're in this sort of first month and we're going to throw a man-month of time at the system and then decide whether we want to keep it, if you spend a man-month installing Paster, then probably the answer is no. Okay, another thing is branding. Like typically web designers give you CSS and HTML, often not particularly good CSS and HTML. I mean, Plone's HTML and CSS is actually one of those things that I think we can be quite proud of, because it is remarkably structured and sensible and kind of easy to understand. And I didn't really understand this because my first sort of exposure to complex CSS systems was Plone, and then I saw some other ones, and you sort of go like, oh my God, everything floats left and has fixed width. And if I put an anchor in, if I put a link inside my bullet point in the middle of my text, it gets a little, red line underneath it. Or like, what the hell is going on? But we need to be able to work with web designers because they're never going to learn plone. They're never going to learn tal. That's sort of one cliff I can think, because they need to understand customization, right? And the skin layers, then you got like browser resources, and they're different, but they're not really different. But they just depends on what we did to begin with. Like plone has 2 different ways of doing something. Content types, I think, is another one. Like I just want to capture some data. Now, Arch and XML does a pretty good job of this, and it's probably the closest we got to something that's approachable, and it works pretty well. But it's still quite brittle. You should be able to define a schema for data I want to capture without having to know that Python. I mean, you do have to know Python if you want to add some behavior to it. So like when I set this field, I actually want to calculate this complex value. And that's fine, but most people just want to store data and render it out again. It's just pure information management. I think deployment is another one that we struggle with because plone is pretty easy to deploy if you've got a proper server. We don't do the kind of cheap web service thing. That's a different discussion. But what sometimes people struggle with is they're not used to working with version control and multi-developer environments and that kind of stuff. They've got some site that has been grown partially on the file system, partially in the ZODB, and then they kind of got to push it to a live server, and they don't know how to do that without doing everything again. And that's kind of tricky because you want to be able to export and import content, and then you want to maybe have staging, so your customer's editing something in your staging environment, and then you didn't realize they were doing that because you told them to go on the other URL, but they didn't, and then you got to sort of merge content between 2 systems, and that stuff's hard. And then I think, I think those other 3 concepts like adapters and utilities are great if you're a developer. I love them, and I currently work on a Java project where I'm trying to reinvent Sub3 inside Java, but they're not, you can't explain an adapter to someone who hasn't done at least some rudimentary computer science. It just doesn't work. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a couple of these quite quickly, and I'll just sort of do the sort of standard thing, and then we will probably open up and just talk about people. And if you have sort of other things you want to throw in here, then do shout out. See, what time is it now? It's half an hour, so I got another 20 minutes. Is that about right? Okay, so changing the colors and logo we already talked about. I think now we got a custom folder. You can do DIY plone style, type or paste or template, and you got CSS manager, which is quite cool. Problem is, you need to know plone in quite some detail before you understand the concept of how do I change the stuff. There's a definite cliff through the web and file system, and then if you do it through the web, the ZMI is scary, and it's easy for you to go in the ZMI and screw something up if you don't know what you're doing, and you can't train people on the ZMI, right? Doesn't really make any sense. You can tell them very, very specifically, click here and here and here. And if you click anything else, you're on your own, mate. So what can we do? I suspect, and this is kind of, a lot of the future stuff is kind of my own thoughts or guesses or feelings. Like I said, this is about sort of us arriving at this together, so it's not like I'm saying this the way it has to be. But I think that really, a lot of this stuff should be clicky through the front end. You should be able to change things. But the only thing is, I think you should be able to go to the settings and change your logo. That's an obvious expectation that people have. But, and we'll come back to this in several places, you need that ability to sort of round trip it to the file system, create yourself a package, or export it. I mean, the way we do generic setup is actually all right if it works. You can say, okay, well, I can export this profile and I can load it back in again and get my site back. And there are ways we can do this that aren't hacky. There are things we can do, and ironically, the stuff that makes it harder to customize now, like the Zob3 stuff, gives us enough structure to build tools that actually make it easier to customize. It's just we haven't done it yet. Okay, so the next step, I guess, we want to do branding, and to get your proper look and feel on a website, you got to know page templates, both the 5 version and the Zob2 versions. You got to understand skin layers. You got to understand browser views, probably viewlets, some other browser resources. You got to maybe understand portlets. And you've got to kind of understand layers in ZML and how they're different from layers in portal skins, and sort of some stuff about localness in sites, and then it's just painful. It's too hard. Alex doesn't know how to do it anymore because he's lazy.
True.
It's true. He doesn't want to learn. But that's the thing, people don't want to learn stuff. Few people are as lazy as Alex. Maybe Danny is. Nobody else is. So there's too many. The problem is that obviously there's too many ways to do it. And there's not really any separation between branding, which is the kind of, well, I just need my logo and the color scheme and I need to sort of just have this like big blob of static HTML that's on all my sites. Like every site of my organization has got this header with this like horrible flash thing in it, and you know, it's got a picture of sort of people shaking hands and whatever else. But you know, that's what I need to do. You should not have to understand, you know, skin layers to be able to do that. But you should just be able to say, this is my template, and I want plone to appear here, here, and here. You still need to be able to do customization. It's just that is a later task, you know, because once you get it looking pretty okay, your boss is going to sign off on the project, and then you can go and do the rest of it. So what I think in the future, I really think CSS should be enough for most people. Like if you have some HTML and you know CSS, and by the way, CSS is really hard. Like CSS is not easy enough for regular people, except it's not our problem to fix that. So it's someone else's problem. So CSS is certainly better than plone, right? And I think the technology we talked about, Limi mentioned it quickly, is deliverance. There's about sort of 2 or 3 different versions of deliverance currently, but the model, I think, is very good, because you write a very simple kind of rules-based file that says, you know, this is kind of what I want to appear where, but you are working with plain HTML. Yeah, Alex?
So one thing I forgot to mention.
Do you want to put that over there? People can.
So
Sing a song.
who
Alex.
uses this? Okay. So one thing I forgot to mention in my previous talk is one of the reasons deliverance is also important strategically is that it's not really tied to plone in any way. So you can use deliverance to skin PHP BB, you know. You can use it to skin Drupal, you can use it to skin anything. So the difference is that you have a rule file for each system. So the way we're doing it on plone.org is that we're using it to skin plone and track. And track will be an integrated part of the navigation on plone.org. So it's really a tool that you can use across all your apps. If you're using .NET, Java, whatever, with deliverance in front, and you can use the same skinning mechanism on all of them. So
I mean, this works. I mean, like our current project, we're using deliverance. I was using XDV, which is like deliverance written in pure XSLT. And we actually deploy static XSLT in Apache, which is ridiculously fast, has almost no overhead, and it's very stable. There's no long-running process. It just sits there, and it works really well. And like we've managed to get people who weren't very familiar with plone customizations, and sitting in the back there trying to streak away, to actually theme plone and do quite a lot with it. And I had to help them a little bit, but actually I had to help them with CSS, not with any plone-specific stuff, which I think is good. There's another thing called plone main template, which Malta and Hannah are working on, which is kind of like deliverance inside plone, and I think it's very interesting, but I won't dwell on it. The point is just we need to be able to say, to get to something that your boss will say, this, or the client will say, all right, that looks like my site. It no longer looks like this blue and green Norwegian thing. You should not need to know anything plone specific. If you're a web designer, you should be able to figure out the rest, and deliverance is probably that. Okay, so template customization. Exactly the same thing on the left-hand side. There's the same amount of pain. This time you've probably got to expect to have some of it. The main problems, I guess, is, you know, the sort of SOAP 3 versus SOAP 2 schism in there. I think there's definitely some things we can do to make views and viewlets and portlets certainly appear to be more of a continuum. So say I've got a full page thing as a view, I got a snippet of something, it's a viewlet, and I've got a configurable placeful thing that I can move around as a portlet, but maybe they're actually, you know, the way you write them is very similar, or maybe we should unify them completely. I'm not sure, but I think, you know, we can make those kind of distinctions a bit easier, because people don't understand the difference between a portlet and a viewlet and when to use each one of them, and probably because they both got weird names. All right, maybe what we call them is they're both called tiles, and there is a tile with settings and a tile without settings, and maybe that's all you need. I don't know. Another problem is there are 3 places to do anything. So if you're going to register one, you got to remember to put the configures HTML line in. You got to do some Python probably if you got a complex one, and you got to put the ZBT in. And unfortunately, because people have big projects, you know, you got sort of 50 things in your browser directory, and for almost every one of them, the template and the Python file are called the same thing, except for the one time when someone forgot to put it the right name, and then, you know, it's like way up, and you got to scroll really far up to find it, and you can't remember it, and you're going to look into configures HTML to remember which files actually this view in. I can't find it, and you grep your own code. I mean, it's ridiculous. So kind of patterns and really kind of saying for the simple cases, you know, ideally just the template. I need some Python code. There's an obvious place to put it. It's not like I have to hunt around. And then if I need complex configuration, maybe then I need some extra configuration. So its future, I think Glowworm is awesome. I think like Glowworm is one of those kind of real groundbreaking things. Is Eric Steele here? Can we give Eric Steele a round of applause, please? And the reason why Glowworm is awesome is because it's tactile. You can click on stuff and you see what's there, and you can, you're in that place and you say, okay, well, I want to change this. I'm going to click the change this button, and it goes into portal view customizations. And actually, I think what we can do is we should be able to use that and the structure that Zope3 gives us to have full file system round trip and say, you do this through the web, but that's not scary because actually there's a button you click and it will give you a package that you can install, and it will just be like a tarball. You drop it in this directory and restart your site, and you have exactly the same thing, just this time it's on the file system. And that actually isn't very difficult. It's just we haven't done it yet. I think that you should not need to know ZCML to do simple browser views. I don't think that we should get rid of ZCML entirely. I think ZCML has a place, but it's more for developers or people needing to register stuff for the default cases. I think there are better patterns. Okay, content types. Currently, like I said, Arch and XML and custom archetypes, they're the same, but they're different because what comes out of them is quite different. We got plone up content, which is a bit of a sort of lightweight types thing, which works, but it's probably too many moving parts currently. The problem really is to build a simple schema of something, you kind of got to understand Python. And that isn't right. I mean, there's no reason why you should need to understand Python. And people don't understand Python, but they do archetypes, because they copy boilerplate and they run, or they use Arch and XML. But what they get out is a big blob of Python that they don't understand it. And if they screw it up, they're completely screwed because they don't know how to fix it. It's like, I'm getting a syntax error on line 19. I don't know what the syntax is supposed to look like. How can I fix it? Lots and lots of boilerplates and archetypes. I think we try to get it down, but there's just a lot of boilerplate and a lot of magic as well in archetypes. Like, where's this factory thing coming from in the FTI, right? It says add my type. What the hell is that? Actually, it's a method. It's a function that archetypes generates by execing a string. I mean, it's spooky. And again, the problem is, the tools we have to make it easier are actually not really maintained by the people who build the framework and they're not the same. If you get something out of Arch and XML or a custom product, they end up looking quite different. And so if you download something from the collective and you go, I wish I could do like this, I just slightly differently, there's no way for you to go, I want to pick this up and actually use it. You got to start from scratch and try and replicate what they did, but you can't understand the code, so it doesn't make any sense. I think that to make a simple schema and a view of that schema, to set properties like this is folder-ish and can contain these things, you should be able to do it through the web. And it's not about through the web programming, it's about saying schemata to capture content is a configuration issue, not a programming issue. Sorry?
Through the web definition.
Through the web definition, right. I mean, that isn't a programming task. There are programming tasks involved with it, like if you've got complex types that have behavior hanging off them that is more than capturing data. For those ones, you should never type Python, right? You should never type Python into a class, you should into a web browser, but then there needs to be a way to say, okay, now I want to learn Python, and I'm not going to throw this away. I'm going to take my definition with me, and I'm going to use it in proper file system version controlled serious code. This problem, incidentally, is solvable, and I have solved it.
And it'll be in the lightning talk.
It'll be in lightning talk tomorrow, yeah. And then specialization in labor is kind of that. Like we talk about, a business user should be able to do this thing, and a programmer should be able to work with the business user. Often there is not a business user and a programmer, but even if there's different mindsets of the same person, I think that it is useful to separate the definition from some of your adapters and logic. And then finally, almost finally, I think I touched on this already. You got behavior. Currently, where do you put your code? If I got custom code, where does it go? I think we actually got pretty good technology for this, but we just need to. I think actually the answer is to use adapters for most things when you need stuff that isn't. But we just got to be more obvious which patterns you use, where do you put them, and also I think we should be able to have standard behaviors like plone sort of like title to ID, or I need DC metadata, or I need dates set up there automatically on publication. Those should just be packaged behaviors that you can say, I want this on my type. Just take a box and you get it. Again, imminently solvable. And finally, I think the stuff that is not content management. So we are a content management system, and if you want to build a time tracker in Plone, be my guest, but that isn't going to be our focus. But the only way we can say that is to say that we have an integration story. Plone's API is never going to be built for you to build non-content management stuff. But if currently you do, and I think the answer needs to be don't do it in Plone, do it in Voodoo, do it in BFG, do it in Grok, do it in Pylon and whatever. And all we really need to do there is provide a few more integration points. So we need single sign-on, like a single sign-on story. Again, easy to do, that says I can authenticate my users to these two different systems. You need the skinning sort of look and feel integration, which Alex talked about. I think, personally, I think that it'd be nice to say, like Plone's kind of recommended framework is Grok, or maybe it's BFG if it gets a bit more mature. So that's what we recommend, because it's quite similar. It uses many of the same technologies. You can take your knowledge with you into Plone, but actually you don't need to. We're not saying you have to. It's just that's what we kind of suggest. And really, if we Repose is the single technology that is going to enable us to say this to people. You can do it. And the final thing, which I don't have up here, is we need some slightly better web service APIs so people can actually manipulate Plone stuff without having to be in Plone, which again is really easy to do. It's just no one's ever bothered to do it. Okay, so finally, just to wrap up, some of the themes here, I think, think about your audience, what they actually learn, what do they need to know. Come up with a one true way of doing something, saying we are going to be opinionated and we are going to have the balls to say this is the way, and we're not going to sort of pussyfoot around the issue and say, well, you could do this, you could do that. Get rid of the other way, so deprecate them, or make it obvious that they're not used anymore. I'll talk about customization registry to anyone who's interested later, but I think we need to kind of give you one single place to both find and customize visual things, at least, that is kind of, it has like a GUI on top of the different components we have. I think through the web, for any configuration or definition, I think that is what people look for these days. They expect rich GUI through the web, but not for development, and never ever do something where if you do something through the web, it doesn't work once you outgrow through the web. It's got to be, the framework's got to grow with you. So I think I don't know how much time we got, a couple of minutes. But if anyone's got any other questions or suggestions or anything they want to say is particularly bad or good. Yeah?
With regard to cutting out and deprecating some of the old ways of doing things, when in discussions previously, one of the resistances to that has been a backwards compatibility strategy.
Yeah, so you're saying what do we do about that?
Well, in my mind, if I do an upgrade from 2.5 to 3, what I'm going to do is I'm going to insist that the client upgrades everything in terms of the functionality, do everything that there's a freeway.
Yeah.
It's going to future-proof.
So I think the question is, what do we do with backwards compatibility if we remove something? I think I'm quite fond of this idea of saying you've got your sort of Plone compats package that you like. You can install this product and it gives you a bunch, or the series of products that give you a bunch of old stuff that we took out or we disabled or we put big deprecation warnings of. I think if we can avoid breaking compatibility, we really have to. But that's different from saying we're going to keep using two different ways. I think we got to have our best practice. We got to eat our own dog food. Yeah, Andy? No? Oh, fine. Yeah.
How exactly are you proposing to define these best practices?
Yes.
What I see is people are arguing their own type, even at conferences, and they're
Sure.
completely
Yeah.
different.
So the question is, how do we define best practice? I actually think that we are, as a community, very good at reaching consensus on things. It takes time, and it's always bottom up, and it's always emergent, but we are never going to have a dictatorship like that, and I don't think it would be good for us anyway. So, I think will be discussions. I think like things like blogs are good. People kind of have discussions that happen, and then I think we need to get better at when that consensus has been reached. Someone needs to document it and say, is this it? And then we can say that's actually out there, and people can then, at that point, just agree, and then we close the discussion. But yeah, I mean, it's a little bit about sort of what is in core as best practice should also be the mantra, and that we have a process to control. Yeah, Alex?
So one of the things to remember is that there is a difference between, people writing on their blog, people presenting at a conference, and what the actual core developers think, because I know it can be confusing, like people experiment with things, people do things, but when we met at the Strategic Planning Summit, it turns out everybody wants pretty much exactly the same. So there is no
I don't see any major conflict. There are a lot of small details.
And when there is a major conflict, if and when there is a major conflict, we do have processes in the community to resolve them. You know, like we did that somewhere around.
So I mean, the internet is a messy place, right? People do crazy things, and that's always going to be like that. So and people do crazy things to their plone instances, and then they have migration problems. But so I don't think there is a problem if you poll people that really like. I'm not talking about the people that have opinions about plone. I'm talking about the people that actually write code for plone. They're pretty aligned in which direction we want to move. I don't think there is a massive split in how we want to do things.
Okay,
But
so
there's certainly a lot of things being discussed.
Alex, stop
Absolutely.
talking.
Yeah,
So
go.
I think this session is over. If maybe do one more question. If you want to talk to me afterwards, then please do. And I think these discussions should happen now and during the sprints. And I think we want to kind of try and get this process moving, whereby we are a little bit more explicit about documenting these. What is the consensus, or kind of structuring the discussion a little bit more. So anyone else have any final questions or things they want to talk about? Yeah.
If someone has a question, but I just want to plug the Birds of a Feather session where I want to bring up this discussion of the things that we can do other than simplifying the code itself to make it approachable to the developers.
Right.
To get more people using Plone. So maybe that's a scope to continue some of the discussion.
So if you're interested in this, Dylan's got a buff today about other ways of getting more people involved, which I think is always something we should be doing. Okay, thanks a lot. I hope to talk to you about all this stuff in the next couple of days. Cheers. Huh? Right? Okay.
Really got it.
Visst, det kan vara lite för Not wishy-washy, but whatever the see.
I just wanted to issue a little warning. Dylan J has a very particular agenda of his own, so just be cautious about seeming to enforce it.
Yeah. Good, thank you.